We often say that cult leaders create these groups around beliefs that excuse or even promote their most depraved and disturbing desires and behaviors. And when it comes to this cult and its leader, well, it might just be one of the most disgusting displays of depravity I have ever seen. Today, we are going to talk about the deeply destructive cult now known as the Family International, but formerly known as Children of God. It's going to be hard to relax through this one. It is really difficult to get through, so I just want you to sit back, take a deep breath, and maybe get something to settle your stomach. It's time to let the fresh air in. Hi, everyone. Welcome back, or welcome if you're new. My name is Erin, and I am fascinated by all things cults, true crime, and unique spiritual practices. I post a couple videos every week on one of these topics, so if you are interested in any of those things and you obsess about them, this is the place for you. Also, I am really excited to share that this is my 100th episode. Around this time last year, I started creating the vision for this channel and what I really wanted it to be. I started building out this studio, soundproofing the room, doing research on all of these groups that I wanted to cover. And I'm so honored and blessed that it's grown to what it's grown to today. I think we're at around 16,000 subscribers. I posted my first video on September 30th of last year, and this has been such a rewarding journey for me. That sounds culty in itself to talk about my journey, but it's really, really fulfilling. I feel like I'm more fulfilled than I've ever been in my entire life, and that is because I have supporters like you. So thank you so much, especially if you've been here since day one. Oh my gosh, so much has changed. And it's thanks to your support that I actually have sponsors of my channel, and today's sponsor is Aura. And right now is like the perfect time to be talking about Aura because hackers are just like the silent enemy right now. Maybe you've heard in America, but hackers have stolen the social security numbers of literally all of us, every single American citizen. That's over 2.9 billion records that were stolen from national public data, and that offers personal information to employers and private investigators, staffing agencies, and other people who are doing background checks. These stolen records can include your full name, your address, your date of birth, your social security number, your phone number, and all of your alternate names and birth dates. And as someone who feels like I'm making myself a target for certain disgruntled cult leaders, this has become such a concern for me over the last year. So members of this hacker group have reportedly released all of this information for free online. And this just makes me feel so terrified. I mean, it could affect not just your privacy, you could get your identity stolen, you could get your credit score absolutely destroyed and ruined, which I had really bad credit and I've worked really hard over the last 5 years to try to build it back up. If you know, you know, it is really hard to build it back up when it has been just like in the tank. So if you weren't taking precautions with your personal information online before, now is the time because you are literally never more vulnerable online than now. And I don't want to scare you, but you don't have to be scared because we have Aura. So Aura will let me know right away if they find my phone number, email, or social security number anywhere on the dark web. And they're going to let me know immediately if anyone tries to use this information to access my credit or my bank accounts. I mean, they literally give you up to $5 million in identity theft insurance should the worst case scenario actually happen. They also provide a bunch of other amazing features to keep you safe online, all inside one app. And this includes parental controls, because we know some of those younger tweens, teens, and everything in betweens are running rampant on the internet. So if you want to get a 14-day free trial with Aura, you can go to my link, aura.com/letthefresherin, and that 14 days is going to be enough time for Aura to find out if you have any of your personal data exposed. I highly recommend you do this right now, because not only is national public data not really going to do anything for you, they probably aren't going to be held accountable for this, which is really, really unfortunate, because it's all of us who have to end up paying the price. So I'm not going to leave myself or my family vulnerable to data breaches, and you don't have to either. You can go to aura.com/letthefresherin to try your 2 weeks for free. So make sure you go check out Aura today. And once again, thank you, Aura, for sponsoring today's video. And thank you to all of my wonderful viewers, because without you, I would not get opportunities like this. Now let's get right into the reason you are here.
This group has its serious problems these days, and that is also true of the children of God, the informal and loosely knit movement of young people who have turned on to God. Here's a report.
So today we are going to travel back in time to the 1960s. It was the age of hippies, free love, drug use, and apparently the golden age of cults. I feel like lately it seems like a lot of the cults that we're talking about started around this time. And honestly, it really makes a lot of sense if you think about it and you consider the history of the country in particular at the time. I mean, people were searching for a new way of living, something a little more non-conformative. Many young Americans were rejecting societal norms. You know, they wanted to throw the whole idea of the nuclear family out the window and become more aware of the broad world around them. I mean, if we think about it, it's kind of like what we're seeing with social media today, except with television. TV hadn't really been around that long. We used to get all of our information from the radio, and suddenly we are seeing and hearing from multiple cultures all around the world. I mean, we had a much bigger understanding than ever before about the world around us, and people were starting to get triggered. I mean, many people were angry about the United States getting involved in wars, and an incredible revolution was happening in America. Women were fighting for equal rights, and Black Americans were fighting against discrimination. People were just really wanting to get more involved in changing their lives and having their voices heard. And many people were starting to trust the government less and less. Some scholars call the 60s the revolutionary decade because just so much was going on. I mean, people were aware of all the terrible things going on around them, hoping and willing to fight for change in their own backyard. But they were also just exhausted at trying so hard for their basic human rights. And people started turning to drugs, free love, and ideas of communal living because it just seemed way better and easier to think of us all as a unit instead of continue to preach and live by these very individualistic ideas that capitalism itself promotes. So living in community with supportive people, loving them, and focusing on that connection and support really seemed to be like the new ideal. But like with many things, people kind of swung from one extreme of the pendulum to the other. And people just got so involved in drugs and alcohol and music and traveling around that some of the foundations that they would otherwise have in their real life started to crumble. So when the high of the drugs started to wear off, people began seeking out a new kind of high, and many of them turned to spirituality and religion. The late 1960s sparked what would be known as the Jesus Revolution, where hippies were essentially becoming reformed and turning into born-again Christians, with many people even being baptized in Pirates Cove in Southern California. And it wasn't just Children of God who was taking advantage of this pendulum swing. I mean, there were many Christian organizations that were having these massive, massive baptisms. I mean, there's even a cover of Time magazine that features the Jesus Revolution because so many young hippies were suddenly turning to God. So when a man in his late 40s started preaching in the back of the Lake Club Coffee House, just about a half hour north of that giant Pirates Cove baptism in Huntington Beach, it really wasn't that odd for the time. I mean, now I think if we went to a local coffee shop and some rando dude was just preaching God's word, we'd be like, okay, interesting choice. I'm gonna take my coffee to go. This 40-something-year-old preacher's name was David Berg, and this new little fringe Christian group was known as Teens for Christ. Yeah, I think it's already a little concerning right off the bat that we have this grown adult trying to target a bunch of teenagers, but more on that later. So this group combined all of the hottest trends of the 60s. We've got the uptick of Christian ideology, embracing small non-conformist forms of organized religion, and focusing on the youth and their future. And of course, free love, which David Berg would go on to promote within that Christian organization. And he would redefine sex as purely an act of love, not just for one another, but for Jesus himself. So this new Christian group seemed to kind of bridge the gap between hippies and Christians, and it combined all the things that hippies loved into one space. And it was targeting those younger people who were going to be bringing in fresh new ideas. And not only that, but a tactic we often see in churches is the incorporation of music. And David and his family were all very musically inclined. So they were traveling around singing about God's word. So of course, when you think about the culture of hippies at the time, I mean, it's easy to see that they would just be hooked. Berg and his family would tour around and pick up hippies and, quote, lost souls in a bus. And on the side of the bus, there was this sign that said that they offered free food and shelter. So they knew exactly who they were targeting. They were targeting young people who were kind of on the fringe of society, who wanted more meaning in life, who were also very, very vulnerable. They needed shelter, they needed food, and they needed something to believe in to get them off of drugs. So if they got to engage in their sexual preferences while getting literally all of their basic needs met, well then it's like, okay, what's the downside? They get Jesus, community, sex, all promoted by the pastor. So that was the hook. We always want to identify what the hook was when we talk about these groups, because it's always so hard for people to fully understand why anybody would get involved in a group, especially one as heinous as Children of God. But it didn't look like a weird pedophile sex cult at the beginning. It looked like something that bridged the gap between this counterculture and Christianity. So Berg ended up gaining a following that would literally chase him around the country and even the world eventually to share and spread these beliefs. But unfortunately, his followers could never have predicted just how depraved Berg would become. So we've got to figure out, how did we get here? Promoting rampant sex as a way to share your love for Jesus seems to juxtapose the typical purity culture we usually see in Christian organizations. So in order to understand all of this, I think it's important to go back and learn a little bit more about where this disgusting man came from. He was born on February 18th in 1919 in Oakland, California, and both of his parents were evangelists. His father actually ended up converting, I believe, from Judaism over to Christianity so that he could be more appealing to Berg's mother. It seems like his mother was really the domineering presence in the family. So his mother was a reverend named Virginia, and the father was a man named Hjalmar. And these two came from two very different walks of life. So Virginia was brought up in a wealthy Christian home, but she did go through kind of a wild child phase as a teenager and a young adult. And in college, she started claiming to be an atheist. But eventually she would break her back and be forced to be bedridden for 5 years. So sources kind of differ on this next piece of information. And, it's probably because Virginia was most likely lying about it and unable to keep track of those lies as she retold her story. But some reports say she broke her back from falling off of a horse, and others say it was due to her giving birth to her very first child. And apparently, because of these things, her physical state was so bad that she was stuck in bed for an entire 5 years. But then, according to Virginia, she experienced a healing miracle from God, and this would now give her the moniker, the Miracle Woman. How original. So after she received this, as she called it, divine healing, she then became one of the first, if not the first, female evangelist preacher in America, which on one hand, it's like, wow, good for you, yay feminism, having a female preacher this early on in American society. But on the other hand, this is not the woman that you want as God's mouthpiece. I mean, apparently she never even broke her back. She was just at school. Yeah, she was just at university, and instead of telling people, oh, I was at school studying and I was an atheist, but then I returned to God, which I feel like might be a little more resonant with people who may have been a little disillusioned from God and the church, and she was trying to like bring them back to the church. But no, she came up with an elaborate lie about how she broke her back and was bedridden for 5 years. So she had to like switch the story up to make it more dramatic and make her more credible because, of course, a traveling preacher can't scam her congregation if she wasn't miraculously healed by God in some way. However, she would eventually be kind of like disowned by the church because it seemed very mystical the way that she described her experience. So a lot of people, even within the church, stopped trusting her as much. And that was actually why she was forced to become an independent preacher traveling around. It wasn't just because, oh, she's the first female preacher. It's because, oh, you're saying things that don't align with our church. We want you gone. So that's when she started traveling around. Now, David Berg's father, Hjalmar, was no stranger to traveling around and performing for a cause. His previous cause was just because he wanted to be a performer, but he was a Swedish musician who basically grew up traveling around and performing. And so with these combined skills, you know, Virginia's flair for the religious dramatics and Hjalmar's musical abilities, the family effectively created this like Christian family band, and then they committed their lives to the Pentecostal church, which I'm sure, you know, they over there love those dramatics. So this family traveled all the way from California down to Florida and ended up settling there for about 14 years. And this family dynamic was interesting, but very, very strange. And Berg's childhood experiences likely impacted how he ran this cult. Like, it's very clear that instead of going to therapy to process the trauma he endured, he just decided that he was going to convince the masses that, oh, no. What he didn't go through was abnormal. It's normal. Actually, the way he was brought up is normal. It's not traumatic or abusive. That's normal. It's almost like he's projecting his childhood experiences onto other people and making it become normal so he doesn't have to like deal with the fact that it's deeply abnormal and disturbing. So instead of recognizing that he was abused as a child, he ended up promoting child abuse. So mix that with his mother's domineering attitude towards a child's natural curiosity about certain sensations that occur downstairs. It's really, really strange to see that these ideas of sex and children and what a child should be exposed to became a staple in his cult. So Berg would recall a story that when he was a young child, only about 3 years old, he had this nanny of sorts. And in order to help put him to sleep, she would allegedly touch him down there with her hands and her mouth. Now, I think any normal mother would be extremely appalled at this behavior. And I think deep down, David must have recognized that it was inappropriate. But later, he would go on to discuss how much he enjoyed this experience. But he would say that his mother walked in on the nanny doing it and freaked out and fired the woman, but not before literally beating this woman. So all of this is happening to and in front of Berg when he is 3 years old. And he would later express that he felt bad for the nanny because he said he had a feeling that at the time something she was doing was wrong, but he still enjoyed the sensations of what he was doing. Now, I don't believe that to be 100% true because I think he was just trying to brainwash the parents and the children in his cult away from listening to their impulses and their intuition of thinking something's wrong, this is wrong, I don't like when someone touches me like this. And he's saying, oh yeah, I felt that too. I totally felt that too. But then I leaned into how much I enjoyed the sensation. And I just let that all fall aside. So when we start to wonder, why did people stay in this cult when the children were really starting to get involved? It's because he was slowly but surely indoctrinating both the parents and the children into thinking that this was appropriate behavior because, well, when he was 3 years old, it wasn't sexual assault. He liked it, in fact. He liked it. So a few years later, when Berg was allegedly only 5 or 6 years old, his mother caught him touching himself. And this is a pretty normal behavior for the age. I think all children get a little bit curious. But his mother was so incensed by this that she pulled him out of his room in front of the rest of the family, held a knife to him, and said that if he was caught touching himself again, she would literally cut it off in front of the family. Talk about public humiliation and instilling fear in somebody. But this threat of being dismembered by his mother would not deter him from touching himself because, according to him, it just felt so good. So as Berg starts to grow up and starts this cult, we really see this disturbing ideology come up, and it ends up becoming the backbone of this group eventually. Instead of sex being something very private that you share with your partner, he starts to normalize the sexualization of children because he defines sex as synonymous with love. Sex was always and only an expression of love, almost as if you can't fully express your love to Jesus unless you're having sex with somebody. So disturbingly, Berg started encouraging that children be exposed to sex at a very early age so that they know what they like and they know how to do certain acts. It's absolutely so disturbing and disgusting. I can't imagine being intimate with someone in front of a child or justifying those tiny little eyes looking at you. It just would make you feel so dirty to do. And it's so sad to think about the kids that grew up in this group thinking that that was normal. It's heartbreaking. So it's very clear that Berg's upbringing really impacted how he ran his cult, specifically those two events, the getting berated for masturbating and also being essayed by his nanny. But those weren't the only two events that impacted his life and his cult ideology. Apparently, when he was 7, he had a sexual encounter with his cousin while his uncle watched. So he's just being brought up himself in a really twisted family dynamic, and he grew up thinking it was normal, which is interestingly the same thing a lot of Children of God survivors say, that at the time they were in the cult, they didn't understand that what was happening to them was abuse, because it wasn't only sexual abuse, it was both physical abuse and corporal punishment that Berg endured as a child. And then he would go on to promote that his followers do the same thing to their children. All of this behavior was modeled for him his entire life. So one has to beg the question, does Berg fully recognize that this is terrible, awful, destructive, disturbing behavior? Because the way he preaches about it later is disgusting. And then the fact that they try to recant all of that and get rid of all of the evidence, even though it's out there plain as day, tells me that a part of him knew he had to hide it because he went into hiding just 2 years after starting this cult. So part of me is like, he had to know that this was wrong. He had to enjoy that he was inflicting the same pain on other children that he experienced in his life. When he recalled how his parents beat him as a child, he said that it made him respect them more. I mean, this guy is just a deeply, deeply disturbed individual. And instead of saying something's wrong with me, I need to deal with my own shit, he's like, I'm going to make this as normal as possible and surround myself with people who are doing these disgusting things. It's so crazy to think that, like, if this guy had just gone to therapy, how many children could have avoided the same fate that he experienced? I'm sharing his upbringing because it's important to understand how someone got to the behavior they started exhibiting and the belief system that they start pushing. But don't get me wrong, it does not excuse any of the behavior that he was doing to his own family, his own children, and encouraging his followers to do, especially in the name of Jesus, in the name of their religion. I don't know if I've ever heard of something more heinous than this. And I cannot help but wonder how malicious and calculated he really was. But that fact that he went into hiding literally like 2 years after he started preaching really tells me that he knew what he was doing was disgusting. So he was trying to distance himself from it. So as he grows up, he goes to school, and then, of course, he tries to follow in his parents' footsteps and work in the church. He claims that he was a lonely kid, saying, quote, I was frail, shy, and very reticent, a veritable bookworm and recluse who preferred to retreat to the world of study of other times and other places rather than participate in the foolishness and horrors of the hard, cruel world around me, unquote. That's a quote that he is sharing with his followers. So you can hear that he's already planting this seed of an us versus them mentality. Oh, I wanted to retreat, to be with myself and learn about God instead of be around all those common folk that are dark and dangerous and don't get me. It's like, dude, talk this out with a therapist, please. Also, his mother traveled a lot for work, apparently leaving him alone or with a nanny, and she held him to very high standards. But it's kind of hard to empathize with him because in other preachings, he would say that he worked for his mother. He was her singer, a chauffeur, and her assistant. So it's just hard to tell what's true and what's not because all of his stories seem to just contradict themselves. Nonetheless, he would end up following in his mother's footsteps. He became a minister at Valley Farms, Arizona, but was soon fired after he became sexually involved with another younger church employee. But later he would claim that it was because he was just such an advocate for racial diversity that they had him leave because he was just so progressive in his ideology in this conservative church. Okay, then why did you later preach some really, really racist theories, David? Why would you go do that? That's the thing with these cult leaders. It seems like you can always catch them in their lies, but they're always able to try to explain it away. But cult leaders love to record all their musings, and he did so in the form of letters. So literally, all of these teachings, there's proof of them. So it's like you don't have a leg to stand on when you deny the fact that you were actually promoting racist ideology and exploiting children. When David turns 25, he gets married to a woman named Jane Miller, and she would become the mother of the children of God eventually. But they met while he was traveling around evangelizing with his family. And eventually he would find a job and actually stay there for 13 years. But he caught wind that he was going to be fired and essentially just started panicking, saying, quote, I had reached middle age. I had a family. I had worked in almost every kind of job from building construction to the district attorney's office, had been in the army, been discharged as totally disabled due to heart trouble, been an evangelist, pastor, and was teaching school. I felt I was passing my prime and had not yet found God's perfect will for my life, and I became desperate for greater power, more gifts, and greater usefulness to Him. This would mean that I'd be out of a job and almost broke at nearly 50 years of age. Seemingly frustrated and defeated, we were wondering what to do for the Lord, and we just decided to start out like we had in the beginning, with our little family, now teenagers, and start preaching the gospel on the road again. So when his mother hit him up and basically begged him to help her save the hippies in Southern California, he ran to mommy. And unfortunately, this would be when the whole cult thing really started. So this cult doesn't start until he's almost 50 years old. And he's had a history of failing at almost every single endeavor that he ever attempts. And he's had a very strange relationship with sex his entire life. But it seems like all of that was partly because he was like trying to please his mother. Like he has like some severe mommy issues, it seems like, because when his mom passes away, he would take over the group and he would change the game. In my opinion, I think he resented his mother, all of her high standards, all of her abuse, and even her success because he had never achieved it. So many people allege that since he was basically a failure at everything he tried to do and never lived up to his mother's reputation or her expectations, and he was just a sex-crazed lunatic who couldn't stand his mother's purity teachings anyways, it seems like when he saw the opportunity to target these free-loving hippies, it was almost like a middle finger to his mom. I mean, again, this guy is mommy issues defined. And instead of encouraging those purity teachings, he would instead encourage intercourse because, again, God is love and love is sex. But the foundations of this group were not inherently sexual in the beginning. Of course, there were themes of salvation and David Berg being a prophet. You know, they were in this spiritual revolution and the government and society were sinful and society was the enemy, and they would call this enemy the system. Think of like when a conspiracy theorist today calls something the Matrix, like you're stuck in the Matrix, you're just stuck in the Matrix. They would say anyone outside of their group is stuck in the system. So he was really implementing this us versus them mentality within the group and encouraged his followers to constantly recruit because America would be doomed if the people didn't find God through him. What's really, really interesting about all this is it seems like he had been very, very sexually repressed until his mother's death. Sources even say that he had some severe intimacy issues with his first wife, and she allegedly fled with another man, and he had to go get her and bring her back. According to Berg, they never even talked about intercourse together, and he was literally afraid to touch her. And when they did start becoming intimate, his wife would just like stop in the middle of it to go get a snack or like use the bathroom. He even had her seek out medical help because he couldn't understand why she didn't want him. And it's like, dude, she's not attracted to you. But slowly, after his mother's passing, he would start embracing these sexual urges. He's 50 years old now, so it's almost like he's still that little kid or teenager who's first discovering sex and decides he wants to like have it with everybody. It's literally like his brain has not aged with him. Instead, it was like stunted because of all of these like repressed sexual urges and how hard his mom was on him. And then by the time he's 50 and she's dead, he's like, well, now I can do whatever I want. It's like, if I think about this from like a psychological perspective, as someone who has absolutely no formal training in psychology, mind you, it just seems like this guy was so sexually repressed that he was still attracted to the people he was attracted to when he was in puberty, you know? And he wasn't able to recognize how horribly inappropriate and disgusting that is for a 50-year-old man. So since he's in this place of like rediscovering his sexuality and he's running this congregation or cult, he decided that he would just follow every sexual impulse with his followers. So he would start kissing the women goodnight and touching them wherever and whenever he wanted to. He would ask people to not wear bras anymore. He even started having an affair with a younger woman in the group. And then, of course, the behavior started to escalate, and he started sleeping with his followers, and he would promote polygamy. Surprise, surprise. I ask time and time again, can the cult leaders get a little more creative? I say this time and time again, like, don't say it's not a cult if you're literally following the cult playbook. Like, every single cult leader says that they're the ones that get to sleep with all the women. Because this guy, just like many other cult leaders for his time, started coming between women and their husbands, because he basically claimed that he was allowed to do whatever he wanted sexually with any woman or girl of any age in the group, because he was speaking for God. He was the prophet. He could do whatever he wanted. He would just fondle them and basically started implementing the idea that a woman's primary and possibly only purpose was to be a sexual object for a man's enjoyment. And if a woman wasn't comfortable taking her bra off, well, then he would verbally abuse her. He's even quoted as saying, it's so disgusting and horrifying knowing that children are involved. He said, we have a sexy God and a sexy religion and a very sexy leader with an extremely sexy young following. So if you don't like sex, you'd better get out while you can still save your bra. Salvation sets us free from the curse of clothing and the shame of nakedness. We're as free as Adam and Eve in the garden before they ever sinned. If you're not fully saved. Unquote. What? So he's literally equating, no matter your age, no matter what, no matter the relationship you have with the people in the group, no matter all of that, you are not saved by God unless you have frivolous sex with your family and your children and other people's wives. It's horrifying. It's horrifying. So he eventually prophesied that California would be hit by this massive earthquake. So he fled the area and encouraged his followers to spread far and wide and create their own little communes, which is such a strange tactic to me. But I speculate that he was trying to keep from getting caught promoting all of this disturbing ideology. I think he fled because he knew that this was really, really wrong and he could not risk getting caught. So he lived his life separate from the cult, which is interesting because we don't really hear of that so often anymore. And there's this argument that people like to have nowadays, since there's so much online influence of cults and cult leaders. And that's the fact that, oh, well, it's online. It can't be a cult. They're not like, you're not going to a commune. You're not living in one community. They're not like controlling your every move. Well, this is proof that you don't have to. This was back in the day where all they had was letters. So that is how he would communicate with all of his members.
After you're gone, oh Dad, it's gonna break my heart, the love you've shown to me. After reading your letters, the first thing I thought was, Dad, I don't want you to leave. And your sweet promise that we'll carry it on, at least we'll try with all of our heart.
It was just via these pamphlets that he would mail out that he called Mo letters. Because of course he had to change his name to Moses David. So he starts going by Mo, and he wants his followers to go off and create their own communes, and they all have to follow his teachings. So I believe that he did all of this very, very intentionally. He knew it would be harder to hit a moving target. So he encouraged his followers to set up multiple communes all over the country and even the globe. He scared people into leaving the United States by insinuating that God was so upset with the United States that he was going to destroy it. But this tactic worked because at one point, Children of God boasted 130 communes in 70 countries. And that's not the only weird thing that he preached to his followers. We've heard it in many, many other cults, this number of 144,000 people being admitted into heaven. But as his commune grew, as his cult expanded across the globe, there was a concern that there wouldn't be enough spots in heaven for anyone. So what was his solution to this? Oh, just fight each other. You can fight each other for a spot in heaven. Yeah, sounds real Christian to me. So it's said by the mid-70s, there were around 10,000 members of his cult all over the world. And it's just so hard to wrap your brain around numbers like that, especially when he wasn't directly in person controlling people. So it just makes you wonder, okay, well, now what is drawing people to the group at this point? Well, Berg was very ingenious with his teachings. He discouraged people from working and encouraged them to use their own gifts given to them by God. He encouraged people to street perform for money and busk on the street. He wanted people to perform and talk to people about Jesus and ask for donations because that's how the group was funded. So you didn't have to work. If you like to sing, if you like to dance, you could just go out on the street and dance for Jesus and collect donations. And they were a Christian group. They're not saying, hey, donate money to this cult. They're saying, hey, donate money to this Christian organization that is trying to change the world. This is how the people made money to survive. And a lot of these people that were out on the streets asking for money and donations and performing and singing and dancing were children. So we're going to go ahead and add exploiting child labor to the long list of terrible things David Berg did and encouraged his followers to do. But that wasn't the only fundraising tactic he would promote, because of course not. I'm sure we've all heard of this infamous fundraising tactic that he would start promoting in the 1970s. And it was a tactic called flirty fishing, where women in the group would flirt their way into a man's bed to either gain money or donations from them. They also used this as a form of recruitment. They were called hookers for Jesus. And since Berg framed this idea as a way to love God, that literally every intimate act was a woman showing their love for God, and that the money they earned would be supporting the church and their family, people did it. Married women did it. Young people did it. He was literally training children at a young age to be accepting and understanding that in order to live, they needed to love God. He was essentially a human trafficker in the 70s and 80s, basically collecting children to essentially experiment on to see how they behaved so that he could create literature to spread around the world to his cult. And that's how he would make his money. It's like this disgusting system that he's built from a hiding place. It's so hard to wrap your brain around it. But people did it, probably because he would literally use scripture to help promote his ideology. So he would quote Matthew 4:19, "Follow me and I will make you fishers of men." Which it's pretty clear that that's probably not the correct interpretation of the verse, but okay, buddy. We've made this clear that this is a disturbing sex cult. And intercourse was encouraged in front of and with children to teach them how to have sex when they grew up, so that they could then go and flirty fish, basically do sex work in order to make money for the group. But fun fact, he also didn't want anyone using contraception. So what about the children that were likely created from over a decade of flirty fishing? Well, they're known as the second generation or second wave of children that came into the group, and they were called Jesus babies. Yeah, they're called Jesus babies as if this act of love that you engaged in while you were out doing your sex work, you become pregnant with a Jesus baby, and that child may or may not ever know who their father is. And then they're brought up in the cult. They were told the cult is their family. And Berg is their father or their grandfather, depending. And Berg's wife is the mother. So we're going to go ahead and jump to 1978. And it's like, we're only at 1978? What? This is the year that Children of God rebrands to the Family of Love. Now, Berg claims it was because, there were issues within the leadership and we had to do a restructuring because members of his inner circle wanted to discontinue flirty fishing. So guess what happened? Those members forced out of the group, which very well may have happened. He had people in his inner circle who started to question him, so he kicked them out of the group so he could keep being a maniacal, pedophilic creep. But I also speculate it's because cults were starting to come to the mainstream surface. Children of God had actually already been called a cult publicly, and the Jonestown Massacre happened in 1978. So it's my belief that he was trying to rebrand and distance himself from being labeled a cult leader and running a cult. Also, the cult had already been publicly shamed for how it treated its children. And this is really, really difficult to talk about. And sadly, it had been going on for years within Children of God. And we are going to start speaking a little more about what happened to the children. So we all know that David Berg not only excused incest, but he promoted it. He said that in the Bible, it wasn't considered bad or incest. He said that even though a child might initially feel a little weird about what was happening to them, that they would enjoy the physical sensation, that it was a way to help the child relax and sleep, and it was enjoyable for the children. And that literally makes me feel nauseous that I just said that. He again equated having intercourse with God's love. He encouraged followers and young children to this is so disgusting. He encouraged his young followers to send him videos of them scantily clad and dancing for him. I mean, it was a total exploitation of children. There were adults, parents that resisted wanting to have intercourse with their children, and they were shamed. They were shamed. So to combat this, Berg said, quote, "One of the most important things the Lord wants you to learn is that you can be Jesus and his love for the people you share with, and they can be Jesus and his love for you. You can be a channel that the Lord can use to show your brothers or sisters how much he loves them. If you're looking at sharing in this light, that you are Jesus loving one another, then it won't matter so much if the person that you're going to share with is someone you click with, or is handsome or homely, beautiful or ordinary in the flesh, because it will become a matter of the Spirit. This attitude will give you a whole new outlook on the law of love, because you will be loving Jesus and giving his love to another. The love, kisses, and caresses you receive will be from Jesus, and this will cause you to praise and thank him." This is so disturbing, but it's so a part of the cult leader playbook. He's literally reframing and redefining ideas to his followers to make them want to commit atrocious acts towards children, to break down their instincts of, this feels like it's bad. But he's like, if you ever think that it's wrong to sleep with my brother, or it's wrong to sleep with my dad, just think that you're loving God. If you reframe it like that, you won't feel so weird about it. What? If you say that to people whose only life purpose is to get closer to God, they're going to do those things because they believe it brings them closer to God. And I just can't help but think in this moment of all of the poor children who were born into and grew up in this cult, were conditioned in this way. They finally leave the group and they have to reform everything they know about what's appropriate, what familial types of relationships are appropriate. They have to reconcile what was done to them by their family, all in the name of loving God. And we're going to get into this a little bit later, but it's been so traumatic to people who were brought up in this group that An unimaginable number of children who were brought up in this group ended up taking their own lives. And this group is still around today. It's so heartbreaking. So this group is called the Family of Love, and David slept with anyone and everyone in that family, whether or not he was their biological father or not. Children were abused at such a young age, and some adults thankfully saw the red flags, but they were so afraid to fight back or question the teachings because that would not only mean that they're prejudiced against alternative living and ways of life, but at this point they have no job, no formal education, nowhere to go, nowhere to live, no family besides this messed up family that they've all been indoctrinated into. They have nothing and no one on the outside. This is that us versus them mentality too. They're afraid of the system. It's always the system versus the cult. And if you leave the cult to enter the system, well, then you just lost your ticket to heaven. So even if you wanted to leave and save your children from this terrible, terrible life, it would essentially mean that you're going against everything you know and you have absolutely no resources to help you escape. So these second generation children, the Jesus babies, the people born into the cult, a lot of them would finally flee because they got to the point where death felt like a literal better alternative than what they were experiencing. And like I said, sadly, many of them would end up taking their own lives. One surviving ex-member who was born into the cult claims to know at least 100 people who have taken their own life. 100 people. People who survive have also had PTSD from their experiences. What were they meant to do when they got out? Not only do they have to start unpacking all of the trauma they endured their entire life, but they have no resources. Tragically, this brings me to the story of Ricky Rodriguez. So there was another rebrand in 1982, and they rebranded to The Family. And by 1985, they claimed to have changed their ways. They said they had a zero tolerance policy for adults having sex with minors. Very, very conveniently when they're already being called out for being this disgusting cult. The BBC even came out and called the group a cult, even though people have been trying to call them out as early as 1971. But after again being called a cult, they rebranded in 1982 to become The Family. And by this point, people are talking about all of the disturbing and disgusting things that these people are doing to children, all at the hands and encouragement of David Berg. But by 1985, there was so much public outrage that they claimed that they changed their ways. They never promoted sex with children, and anyone who did promote it, they were against. But what actually happened was they tried to destroy all of the physical evidence, the thousands of pamphlets that David Berg had sent out across the world. They tried to just destroy all of that. But luckily, we still have proof because ex-members held on to a lot of those pamphlets so that there was physical proof of what David Berg was saying and doing. One thing that's incredibly heartbreaking, one of the many things that's incredibly heartbreaking about this entire situation is one of the most vocal about this cult after they escaped the group was none other than David Berg's stepson. So Ricky Rodriguez would be one of the most vocal voices against the Children of God / the Family / now it's known as the Family International because they really think that they can erase their disgusting history by just changing their name. But Ricky's story is so tragic because he wasn't even born in the group. He was brought into the group by his mother, who ended up marrying David Berg. And it's almost like he was the guinea pig for David Berg and his mother to figure out how to raise a child. And the things that they did to Ricky was horrifying. I mean, he was forced to have intercourse multiple times a day, every single day as a child. The people that were supposed to take care of him and protect him put him in dangerous situations, and exploited him. Not only as a young child was he exposed to his families sleeping together, but when he was as young as 10 months old, his nanny was encouraged to keep this notebook to keep track of all of the abuses that they had put Ricky through, because they were going to use this as the blueprint to tell all of their followers how to raise a child. And he was being propped up as the future leader of the cult. So he was basically their experiment. They were basically trying out all of these techniques on him. This little notebook would become an actual book called The Story of Davidito. And this was basically the parenting book that would be spread throughout the entire cult across the globe. And it just depicted all the instances of how Ricky was sexually abused from the time he was a baby. This book / it would be kind of turned into these letters would depict Ricky in compromising nude positions with other teenage girls while they also watched their family engage in orgies or sexual sharing. Because again, everybody is up for grabs in this disgusting cult. Angela Smith, one of his nannies, was there almost the entire time witnessing all of this and allegedly keeping tabs of everything so that his father could distribute the story of Ricky's trauma across nations. This poor boy was sexually abused by his mother, who is now still the leader of Children of God. She literally slept with her own son and made other teenage girls sleep with him, and he had to sleep with other adult women when he was underage. All because they were basically experimenting on how to raise a child, how to raise the future leader of the church so that they could continue teaching these disgusting, horrifying things. Oh, but make sure we destroy all the evidence by 1985 and we rebrand. Like, please. You're not fooling anybody. So David Berg would die in 1994, and his wife would take a new husband, and they are now the two leaders of this group. Luckily, 2 years later, in 1996, when Ricky is just 21 years old, he flees away. He escapes, thank goodness. And it was a difficult time for him when he got out. Again, he had no resources, no family, and just terrible, terrible memories of what he had gone through. But it was his need and drive for revenge that kept him going, because he was literally out for blood. There is a video of him sharing his story, explaining what he wants to do, and he starts saying that death is better than his life, what he's experienced. Even if he wanted to go off, and at one point he talks about wanting to go spend some time on the beach and have fun like any normal 20-something-year-old boy, maybe flirt or sleep with some women, that would be fun. He literally says that he only would want to do it for a few months because he would rather die. He's ready to die, but not before first exacting his revenge. He was trying to find his family. So about 6 years after he flees, he starts speaking out publicly about his experience. He posted on a website called Moving On and shared his story about growing up within the cult and the horrific abuses that he witnessed and experienced. He said that he was haunted every single day by the memory of his childhood. He says that the first 25 years of his life was essentially hell. And he just wanted to exact his revenge. He wanted his mother and her husband to die by his hand, but he couldn't seem to find them. He did find out where that nanny lived, Angela Smith, and convinced her to come over to his house for dinner one night. He ended up killing her and then turning the gun on himself because he couldn't bear the memory of his experience anymore. It's really easy to mentally disassociate ourselves from the experiences of victims and survivors when it comes to any true crime story or cult. But when you're able to watch a video and look in the eyes of someone sharing their story and you hear the pain, you feel the resentment, it really helps one understand how detrimental these cults are to people. When things happen that are so hard for us as a person who's never experienced such abuse to wrap our head around, it's really difficult to comprehend and recognize and accept that it's real and that it happened. But this is real and it's happened. And the root of this Children of God, the Family International, the beliefs are rooted in exploiting and hurting and trafficking children and women. Why would anyone want to be a part of that? You can't just erase your history and pretend that it doesn't impact the way you run your religion or cult now. It's still a cult. People who are adults now, even celebrities, will tell their stories of the abuses that they endured at the hands of their own parents, all because of the teachings of this one psychopath. And it's so easy to place judgment on people who get involved in these groups and say, well, why couldn't you leave? They couldn't necessarily just leave. What's going to happen to them? If you grow up in a cult and you're not allowed to watch TV, you're not allowed to go to school, you have no interaction with anyone outside the cult, you have no understanding of what life is like outside of the group, who do you have to run to? Who do you really have to go to? You would probably rationalize yourself into staying because there are so many questions that need to be answered before you can even leave. If anyone, I mean, it's a difficult comparison to make, but I think that anyone who has ever had an idea to start a big project, but you don't know where to start, and you get that overwhelming feeling of, it's almost like a numbness, like you just cannot take the next step towards the goal because you're so far from it. Imagine being in that frame of mind, knowing that you need to take action to get out of a situation that's really harmful to you, but you have absolutely no idea how to get started. You have no idea how to just turn the knob of your front door and push it open because you're so afraid of what you'll find on the other side. The people who have left this group are not just traumatized from the things that have happened to them. They're culture shocked and traumatized from, I mean, as adults, they're getting re-traumatized every single time they try to take a step forward, even now, even the people that still speak out now. There are countless stories from survivors who were brought up and raised in this group, and their stories are, I mean, heartbreaking, disgusting, disturbing. They're not even strong enough words. I don't think there are strong enough words to express how horrifying this group is. And I know there's a lot more I could discuss on this group. And there's a lot of disturbing quotes from David Berg himself. And honestly, this group it needs to be shut down. It needs to be shut down now. I know that there's a freedom of belief, but like, if that freedom of belief means that you're violating laws and violating children and human beings, then you don't deserve and you should never be practicing that belief or religion. It's really so heartbreaking, and it's really scary that there are so many people that have stories about this terrifying group. I really hope that if a survivor sees this, they know that they're supported. They have people that want to support them if they need it. Please feel free to share your story with me at letfresherin@gmail.com, and I will try to share it. And honestly, you can share your Zelle or your Venmo information with me if you're in a position where you need some extra support to get out of a dangerous situation, because the finances are oftentimes what keep people in a dangerous situation. And if I can have any small role in helping someone get out of a group like this or a relationship that's dangerous, I want to do my part. So please feel free, if you made it this far, to email me if you need some additional support, and I will do my best to provide or share it with my subscribers. So on that note, wow, that was a lot. Thank you guys so much for sticking with me today. I know this is like a really, really heavy topic. It really took me a long time to sit through researching this because I had to keep stopping and starting and taking breaks. I think I had to take like a 3-day long break from looking at any cult or true crime anything, which is why I skipped an upload last week, because I was like, I just need a mental break. This is heavy. So I really hope that you're able to take care of yourself. Please, let's be understanding of victims and survivors of groups and situations like this and be as empathetic as possible. And please just stay safe out there. Ask questions and trust yourself. If something's making you feel like it's bringing up a red flag or making you feel skeptical, there's probably a reason. So please listen to that impulse. I want to thank you all so much for watching this video today. I appreciate you. And please take care of yourself out there. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend, and thank you again to Ara for sponsoring this video. And thank you if you've been here since day one. I can't tell you how much I appreciate your support. Until my next video, guys, thanks so much. Bye.